Okay, welcome everyone to our July webinar for UK PACT, the last one of the academic year, and we are here to celebrate and also to reflect on our progress and talk a bit about some of the research that Ana Lopez and I have been doing in this emerging space, this space of becoming. And we'll more on that in a moment. We also have with us Simon from Ready Salted, Simon Holly. Oh, sorry, Simon, I'll get that right.
Hollywood.
Hollywood, thank you. Simon Hollywood from Ready Salted, the web design people who came up with our fantastic new website, which we'll do a little walk through towards the end of the session. But yeah, so today's session we'll do a talk about the idea of parents and carers networks as new labour actors, and Anna will start us off on that. And then we will do a walkthrough of the website, and then we'll have some just general chat about where we're at and where we want to be going next year. So I hope that sounds okay. And we'll hopefully wrap up at about 1:45, so you can all get on with some sunshine and some more lunch and stuff. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Anna and I'll do the slides, Anna.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everybody. It's really great to be here. Mark and I want to just share with you some of the findings of the research we've been doing. So, Mark, can you share the slides?
Are you able to see it now? Is it?
No.
Oh.
Not yet.
One moment. Apologies.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so we just start with a bit of an overview of what has been happening so far with our research. So mostly we're presenting a paper that we've been working on together, and it's almost ready to be submitted. And we start with this overview of the research and project journey so far. So we started in 2022 and we got a bit of funding for this research. The first thing we did was to put together a project group, because this was going to be, a very participatory approach to research from the start. In the project group, we had members from parents and carers networks and organizations that are, relevant to our policies and our interests. The first sort of research exercise we did was a mapping exercise to find out where in universities around the country, where these networks exist, where they don't exist, where they are, very well established, where they're starting, and so on. So that was a really good way to start to understand the field. And then we followed that with a survey that we tried to spread as much as we could around parents and carers networks, members, chairs, and so on. And we got 261 responses to that survey. So again, that enabled us to understand who is part of these networks, what are the main activities and the key issues that the networks are interested in, deal with, and so on. It also allowed us to find volunteers for a series of interviews. So we did 35 interviews with members and chairs of parents and carers networks in UK universities from all over the country, and maybe some of you have been part of those interviews. And the research that we're presenting here today is mostly drawing on this part of our data and these interviews. We then analyzed the data. We kind of included ourselves in the data, because Mark and I are very much part of this community. We are part, and Mark is a founder and leader of his Parents and Carers Network. For a while, I was also a co-chair of the Carers Network at my own university. Always with this ethos of doing things together, we then invited all of our participants to a workshop, face-to-face, in-person workshop that took place last year at Newcastle, and we co-generated a toolkit for parents and carers networks. And the website that we're launching today is going to enable that tool, that collective tool, to be accessible to everybody. And then finally, towards the end of last year and this year, Mark and I became the facilitators of this national network. So we're becoming, going from researchers to continue to be activists in this space. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the research questions that we are really exploring in this paper is what is the potential for parents and carers networks to become powerful actors in the employment relationship. And I'm very interested in employment relations. That's really the field in which I do research. And we understand the employment relationship to be the relationship between employer and employee. Usually there are also other key actors that have the power, the potential to impact this relationship, to make it better or worse. And trade unions are usually seen as a key actor here, but also the state, so different kind of actors. And we think that maybe there is a potential that our networks will become powerful actors in this relationship, so the power to affect it and impact it. We also ask the question, perhaps a bit provocatively, whose interests do parents and carers networks really serve? So obviously, our networks serve our interests as parents and carers, employees, members of staff, but we also know, and if you've done the interview with us, we've explored a lot the issue of to what extent we also serve a purpose for the organizations where we work. So, also the interests of our employers. So that is the question. So next one, please, Mark. Okay, so then briefly, in terms of the literature that we're drawing on, there is quite a bit of literature on diversity networks. Sometimes they appear in the literature as employee resource groups that has a connotation of being more like a social support group, but they're also seen as staff networks or diversity networks. And this literature then involves more of the scope for, having an impact on policy and advocacy and so on. A lot of this is within the discourse of diversity management. So again, there's a question here about, to what extent do these networks serve the purposes of the employees, of the staff, or are they part of the organization's discourse around diversity? There's a sense of a business case and having to be seen as an organization that promotes diversity and inclusion and those sorts of things. So next one. We also draw a lot from employment relations literature, and in this field there is an argument, a debate about the changes in how employees have been represented by trade unions and how trade unions have been changing. So obviously, I would say that in our space, in higher education, they are still hugely important. Mark and I were just talking at the beginning of the call about how in my university, we just had a major win from our union. We were threatened with compulsory redundancies, and because we had a big union campaign that involved industrial action, we have now stopped the compulsory redundancies. So they are still there. But we also know that not all employees are represented by trade unions, not all employees are members of trade unions, and therefore there is a space for new labour actors that also represent the interests of employees. A lot of the literature are about new labour actors that have emerged outside organizations. So, for example, community groups, citizenship groups, charities that do the work that perhaps traditionally and in the past we would see as the work of trade unions. Our work and our study focuses on parents and carers networks as actors within organizations, not outside. So that's our first question: is can we become, an important actor within organizations, within our own universities? But We also know that we are connected with external organizations, and maybe charities or third sector organizations that are relevant to our interests, like Pregnant and Screwed and other organizations within this space. So we're exploring the question of whether there is the potential for us to become a new labor actor within a national scale, outside our organizations at a national scale. Next one, please, Mark. And finally, in this kind of literature part, we also draw on this theory, mobilization theory, that has been very much used within studies of trade unions, but it really tries to explain how collective action comes about. So for us, this is very relevant because, you know, a question that is important for us to understand is, how do our networks come about? How is it that all of us, you know, activists in this space, who are individual workers, who are often, if not always, time poor, how do we mobilize and actually become collective agents? Okay, so we may start with a specific individual issue, and it may look like, okay, this is just my individual problem, but then when we organize in networks, this becomes a collective issue and we become collective agents. And how does that happen? And according to this theory, that we need 4 elements or 4 legs. We need a sense of injustice, and, you know, in our space, certainly there is something very defined in terms of a sense of injustice about the way work is organized without, you know, appropriate flexibility for our needs, policies that may not be adequate for us, costs of childcare, and so on and so forth. Then we also need social identification, and again, you know, we have social identification as parents and carers, and we know we've discussed this in other sessions, that with the carers' identity, sometimes it takes a while to arrive at an awareness of that identification. But once we have it, then, you know, we can be a network. We need attribution as well, and in our case, it's attribution to the fact that the problems that we experience, you know, that create a sense of injustice, can be addressed or solved by particular agencies. In our case, it's our organizations, our universities, also the state. Okay, so we attribute to some actors that capacity to solve or address our issues. And then we need leadership. And as you'll see in the rest of the presentation, we understand how important leadership is for our networks and how reliant we are on our leaders. So next one, please, Mark. Great. So that was in terms of theory and literature, and now just a brief word about method. So our approach to research is a critical, community engaged scholarship. So we are critical and we are very much engaged. So there is this sense of partnership between us. We focus on social justice and active scholarly engagement. That is, we're not detached observers trying to be as objective as possible. We are part of the same community. Our Parents and Carers Networks members and stakeholders were involved from day one, and I talked a little bit about our project group. And here we see images of our workshop at which we co-created the toolkit. And then I already mentioned the 35 interviews that we're presenting in this paper. And just to say that the analysis of these interviews was done following an approach of narrative, and specifically a narrative of becoming. So what we're trying to analyze, to take from the interviews, were people's perceptions of how the networks have the capacity to become something. So we're always, you know, in change, evolving and becoming, not as something that is static and, you know, it is what it is, but on the contrary, something that is changing all the time. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, and just to say that our critical perspective, because critical is also part of this approach, has emerged very much through our data. So from earlier on from the survey, but also from our interviews, we could notice that Parents and Carers Networks members are mostly women, and therefore we decided to launch Fathers Forums for Networks. So that was our critical response to that. And also we realized mostly from the interviews that many networks organize for power, but there is a price to pay for that, and that's usually time, which is why the idea of a co-constructed, co-created toolkit came about, so that we can address the time poor leadership problem that we realize that many networks face. Okay, so shall I pass on to you now, Mark?
Yeah, that's fine, Anna. Thank you very much.
Findings from this.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to take us through some of our qualitative findings, and Anna and I are writing this sort of a final draft of this paper at the moment. One of the things that we wanted to kind of get into was what we observed amongst our the networks that we've engaged with. Some networks having coming to their organizing through different paths, and that's often bound by their institutional context. We termed these as either institutionally aligned, and you can see on the tables on the left column the idea of perhaps being established by an HR or an EDI function within the organization with a specific remit for that. And typically with that, there might be some workload hours associated, some protected time, but also an expectation to have formal governance, committee reporting, perhaps an annual budget as well. But that kind of top-down rationale for why it exists, part of, as Anna mentioned earlier, the diversity management strategy. And the other type of organisation that we observed, and it's similarly at Northumbria University, where I have the Parents and Carers Network that I lead, it's this idea of being grassroots. So not kind of the diversity management strategy, rather emerging from the staff themselves. So no formal reporting channels, rather a seat at the table. I know others have spoken about that sense of still having a seat at the table. Variable practices, so sometimes it's more self-directed. Some have really good and organized governance structures. Some are more kind of emergent. Certainly no fixed budget, but still can sometimes access some funds, and typically no workload hours. So you're drawing upon more voluntary time, which has its own challenges. And it's important to highlight that we're not suggesting that one approach is right and one is wrong, rather that these both exist and there is hybridity in that. So some networks had a bit of both. But we thought it was useful to think about how these were different and perhaps how these might enable mobilization and the growth of networks. So we think about, this is the some of the data that we drew on, some of the narratives, and then remembering that we're thinking about becoming as well. And I always, as a chair myself, come back to these ideas of what the networks offer their members. And often when you find members are less engaged, or you put a question out and you get a small handful of answers, it's these quotes that really give me faith to keep going. And I think of these people, it's the knowing they exist is such a relief. That sense of that people are aware that these networks are there. They're there for them. They don't necessarily have the time or capacity to engage in a very active way, but they know it exists. It's a sense of solidarity, a sense of community, and that's very important to remember for those chairs on the call. But also, we've spoken about attribution and injustice, but also a sense of enjoyment as well, a sense of finding community, of finding people who can resonate with you, who can support you, who can perhaps have some fun as well. That is also incredibly important to remember and to hold on to in terms of this, how these networks come together, how they mobilize and grow. These are both really important factors just to open up with. The next factor, so we mentioned mobilization and the different state actors or even within an organization. So we then considered how they might relate to or work with trade unions And specifically given the sense that, and some of the literature that says that trade unions are still, even with Anna's great success at Newcastle, there are still data showing a decline in membership density. And that sense of how might they work together if that was a possibility. And one respondent really kind of summarized this nicely with the kind of analogy of the good cop, bad cop, and the union adopting the bad cop role, the more assertive face, and the network perhaps being the more welcoming face, the good cop that can smooth over it and perhaps have conversations in the background to strategize this. And that might be for those of you who have that relationship in your own organizations, something that you already do. But we found that a really nice way of encapsulating that through that narrative. That was a really interesting way of thinking about that within organization New Labour Act. So then there was thinking about this sense of attribution and then the different kind of perspectives on that and the critical perspective on that. Certainly there was more than one participant who was very conscious of the idea of networks as looking good on the website. And obviously we're going to have our own website later, but certainly the idea of it being an appealing presence on a recruitment page of a website. This is the kind of staff culture we have here. But equally, so that might be more aligned with the management alignment perspective, you know, who are they really serving? But also some networks were viewed as agitators. They were really conscious of that. I myself have felt that at times as well. And it's, you know, is that the important part of the role of a parents and carers network if they are to be considered a new Labour actor in that more a gentle sense? So then we will look for evidence to kind of say, yes, are these networks really having an impact? Do they have power? And many of you will have experienced the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns, and that kind of sense of crisis kind of amplifying the need for these networks. And I know a lot of networks really grew at that time. And so one participant spoke specifically about the direct line they had with their vice chancellor, getting opinions on reports, and really understanding themselves how powerful that felt to feel that sense of really influencing how an institution was responding in a time of crisis, being spoken with and included in the top level communications, and that felt really significant. But one of the questions it begs is, did that continue beyond COVID? Was it the crisis itself that made that possible? And does that relationship continue? And then something that we're very interested in, I think, how important, how contingent it was on COVID. Another dimension, so another leg of the chair for mobilization is leadership. And we know that, having spoken to chairs, that some of them really feel the weight of that leadership responsibility, and you know, that sense of how much they feel responsible for and who they feel responsible for, and the cost of that for some, those in academic roles, has been that their research has not progressed the way they would have perhaps hoped for, and similarly, if there's an over reliance on a chair, then the sense of what would happen or what if that person does not continue. Do you need to therefore foster leadership beyond individuals, have a multitude of leadership within your network in order to be that kind of sustainable actor in the employment relationship? So that was Colin's comment, the sense of needing to have, you know, a really coherent strategy. So that kind of leads us to this sense of a Faustian bargain. So the idea of a Faustian bargain, those who are familiar with Dr. Faustus, the idea of being offered riches in life, but a price to pay at the end. You know, that is the kind of the problem of having a close relationship with management. Can that lead to some tensions? there's a desire to advocate, but is there also limited organizational power if you don't have that closeness to a committee structure? One of the main issues with being a recognized labour actor is what is our big power? What can we do as parents and carers networks? And obviously trade unions can withdraw their labour, and we know, and we've just had a story from Anna at the start of how successful that can be. So parents and carers networks occupy that in-between space. And are they the good cop that can work with? Is that how they become a new labour actor? And equally, this sense of it being contingent on an organisation, how they operate, the culture they have. So for some networks, they had gone dormant almost because the culture in that organisation hadn't fostered it. And in other places, it works really well to be very close with management because they've supported it, they've resourced it. So I think all of that inconsistency and that risk of potentially being exploited potentially prompted Anna and I to think about the idea of UK PACT as a national community to build on our national profile as well, and to perhaps support those who are in a supportive environment. So yeah, just to kind of retread that ground on Faustian bargain, it's are you going to become an instrument of management control, part of that committee structure, but perhaps there for that profile on the website, or are these networks really organizing and having power and influence and really affecting change? And that's perhaps one of the tests of how much they could be considered a new labour actor. So that's one of the ways we wanted to frame that and think about it. So yeah, just to kind of come back to the beginning, that's why we've kind of built on our sense of being a national network. We had our network workshop in June 24, which was great, bringing people together. Some of those people are in this on this call, and it's been great to go on this journey with you. And we hope we can continue this journey as we go forward into the next year as well. But that coming together that's really important to our sense of it being a labour actor beyond organizations, actually, that sense of we are together. And what we're going to be talking about in the next portion of this call is what came from that workshop, that toolkit, and where it is now and in our website. So that's, again, these are some of those images from that. So yeah, just to kind of summarize, yeah, UK PACT continues to grow with this as community. We are thinking about how it might grow beyond higher education as well, potentially, but certainly we want to grow it within higher education. We've got our website to talk about shortly, and we also will be looking at the next webinar series in the next academic year. So the question is, can the national network become a new labour actor? Because Anna and I certainly feel that the parents and carers networks within organisations have become and are still becoming new labour actors. So can the national network also make that step too?